There is a particular kind of football story that only the World Cup can produce. Not a story about a goal or a result or a manager's decision. A story about whether the tournament itself happens at all. Whether a nation that earned its place through years of qualification arrives at the competition it worked toward, or whether the world outside the stadium makes that arrival impossible. Those stories are rare. They require a specific set of circumstances, a level of tension between football and the world around it that most tournaments never reach. The 2026 World Cup reached that level, and it didn't happen with one nation. It happened with 5 of them. 5 top football nations, each for different reasons, each through different processes, each reaching the edge of a decision that would have fundamentally altered the character of this competition. And then, in each case, something happened. A resolution arrived. A negotiation concluded. A federation drew a line. A diplomatic arrangement was found in the most unlikely of places. Each of the 5 stayed. The tournament is happening with all of them in it. But the path each nation took to get here, the weeks of uncertainty, the public statements, the institutional debates, the extraordinary resolution in one case that involved a border crossing, a neighboring country, and an ancient Persian proverb. That is the story worth telling in full, because it reveals more about the 2026 World Cup and about the state of international football than the promotional material ever will. Let's go through them, one by one, in order of how close each came to the edge. Start with Iran, because Iran's story is not a debate that was discussed and then quietly resolved. It is a sequence of events that went further, more publicly, more dramatically, more definitively than any other in the history of this tournament's preparation. Iran had qualified early, 4 consecutive World Cups, a team with genuine quality and a football culture that runs deep. Then, in late February, the military situation between Iran and the United States began, and within days, Iran's sports minister appeared on state television and said 6 words that stopped the football world. Under no circumstances can we participate. Not a statement of concern, not a signal of unhappiness. 6 words, an absolute. He went further. He said the country's children were not safe, that the conditions for participation simply did not exist, that 2 wars had been fought in 8 or 9 months and thousands of people had been killed, and that, given those facts, participation in a World Cup hosted by the country responsible was not something Iran could consider. The Asian Football Confederation said it had received no formal notification from the federation, that the federation itself had told them it was going to the World Cup. The tension between those 2 positions, the sports minister's absolute statement and the federation's continued preparation, played out in public for weeks. What emerged from that tension was something unprecedented in World Cup history. Iran's football chief said the team would not boycott the tournament, but would boycott the matches in the United States. They wanted their group stage games moved to Mexico. FIFA declined. Instead, something else was arranged, a base camp in Tijuana on Mexican soil, directly south of the American border. Iran sleeps in Mexico. They cross into the United States on match days. They play their games at stadiums in Los Angeles and Seattle, and then return south. Mexico's president agreed without conditions. The governor of Baja California welcomed the team as if they were at home. The Iranian ambassador invoked a proverb about friendship revealing itself in difficult moments, and a nation whose sports minister had said, "Under no circumstances are we participating," is at the 2026 World Cup, sleeping in one country and playing in another. An outcome no one planned for and no rule anticipated, but an outcome. Now, Germany, the most publicly visible European debate. In January, the vice president of the German Football Federation, also the president of a Bundesliga club with a long history of social conscience, gave an interview to a newspaper in Hamburg. He said that time had definitely come to think and talk about a boycott concretely.
He was not speaking in hypotheticals. He drew a direct comparison to the Olympic boycotts of 1980 and 1984. He asked whether a red line had been crossed. He asked whether the current political climate was comparable to the Cold War. And he asked a question that cut to the heart of what European football had been struggling with all year: how a governing body that threatened sporting sanctions over armbands in Qatar could now say nothing about the circumstances surrounding a tournament in North America. The German Football Federation did not let that debate drift. The executive committee met specifically to address it. Their conclusion was firm: a boycott was not under consideration. The Federation believed in the unifying power of sport. Their goal was to strengthen that positive force. But the statement came with something else: a quiet but unmistakable rebuke of the man who had raised the question in public. Debates on sports policy, the Federation indicated, should be conducted internally. The substance was rejected, the manner was rebuked, and Germany, four-time World Cup winners, currently the world's top-ranked nation, traveled to North America and prepared to open their campaign in Houston against Curaçao on the 14th of June. The Netherlands arrived at a similar conclusion through a different route, not a senior official speaking to a newspaper, but a petition. More than 163,000 people added their names to a formal request that the Dutch national team withdraw. That number is not background noise. It represents a substantial portion of the country's football-following population making a specific, documented, on-the-record choice. The Dutch Football Association's response was careful. It acknowledged the political sensitivity, said it was monitoring developments, and confirmed it was maintaining contact with government and broader football authorities. But the conclusion was the same as Germany's. The Netherlands are participating. Their squad is assembled. The games will be played. The petition of 163,000 people was heard, acknowledged, and ultimately set aside.
France's situation produced the most diplomatically careful language of any of the five. The sports minister was asked directly whether France was considering a boycott. Her answer was precise in a way that political language always is when a door is being deliberately left open. She said there was no desire to boycott at this moment. She said she was not prejudging what might happen. She said she wanted to keep sport separate from politics. And then, in a line that was noted carefully in football and political circles across Europe, she said she was not going to predict what might happen. Not the same as saying no, not the same as ruling it out. The language of someone who has assessed the current temperature and reached a conclusion, while preserving the right to reach a different one if the temperature changes. A member of the French Parliament went further, publicly calling for the tournament to be relocated, suggesting that only the Canadian and Mexican portions should proceed and that the United States should be stripped of its matches. The Federation did not endorse that position. France named their squad. Deschamps confirmed this would be his final World Cup. Mbappé confirmed he was ready, and the world's top-ranked team boarded their flights to North America. Spain is the fifth, and Spain's story has a different character from the others because Spain's boycott threat was attached to a specific conditional, not a response to the general political climate surrounding the primary host country, but a specific question about who else was at the tournament. Spanish government officials raised the possibility that Spain would not participate if Israel qualified for the competition. The Spanish Prime Minister had been vocal about calling for broader exclusions of Israel from cultural and sporting events internationally. Party officials said they would not remain silent if Israel was at the World Cup. They said they were considering removing the national team from the competition. Israel were in UEFA qualifying. The expanded 48-team format gave them a realistic route to the tournament for the first time since 1970, and the conditional that Spanish officials had attached to their boycott threat was, for several months, a live one. Then UEFA's qualifying process concluded. Israel did not make it through. The specific condition that Spain had attached to its boycott threat did not come to pass. Spain, the reigning European champions, are at the 2026 World Cup without ever having to publicly walk back the threat their government officials had made. The condition resolved itself. The team is there. What connects all five of these stories, and what makes them collectively significant beyond any individual narrative, is what they reveal about the relationship between football and the world it exists within in 2026. Each of the 5 nations reached the edge of a decision that would have been genuinely historic. No qualified nation has ever boycotted the World Cup itself for political reasons. That record has stood through every edition of the modern competition, through conflicts, through diplomatic crises, through waves of institutional controversy. And in 2026, 5 nations came closer to challenging that record than at any point in the tournament's modern history. Here's the interesting part. The fact that none of them crossed that line does not mean the line doesn't exist. It means the line was approached, examined, and ultimately not crossed, for now. Germany's federation's rebuke of its own vice president was not a dismissal of the concerns he raised. It was a decision about how and where to have that conversation. The Dutch petition of 163,000 people has not been answered, only set aside. France's sports minister did not say never. She said, not at this stage. These are not closed conversations. They are paused ones. The historical context matters enormously here. The precedents that Oki Gottlieb invoked, the 1980 Moscow Olympics and the 1984 Los Angeles Games, are remembered most powerfully for what they cost the athletes who were denied their moment. The swimmers and sprinters and gymnasts who had prepared for years, for whom a single quadrennial competition was the pinnacle of their career, and who found that politics had taken it from them. Those boycotts are not generally remembered as successes. The political situations they were designed to protest continued regardless. The sport moved on. The athletes who missed their chance never got it back. That history is the most powerful argument available to those who opposed a boycott in every one of the 5 nations, and it worked. The players, whose careers are built around exactly this kind of moment, who have qualified through years of effort, who have everything to gain from performing on the biggest stage in football, are not willing to sacrifice their chance for a political statement, however legitimate the concerns behind it might be. That is not a failure of principle. It is an honest reckoning with what a boycott actually costs and who pays that cost.
But something has shifted. The conversations that happened in Germany, the Netherlands, France, Spain, and throughout Iran's extraordinary sequence of events are not conversations that disappear when the tournament begins. They are conversations that have been documented, quoted, recorded, and published. They represent a level of institutional and public pressure on the World Cup that the governing body has never previously had to manage from this many directions simultaneously. And the resolutions, however genuine, were achieved not through FIFA addressing the underlying concerns, but through the specific circumstances of each nation resolving or deciding to set aside their specific grievance. Iran's resolution required Mexico to open its border and absorb the diplomatic consequences of a situation the primary host created. Germany's resolution required a senior official to be publicly rebuked for asking a question that his federation ultimately could not answer. The Netherlands resolution required 163,000 people to be told that their petition had been noted and that the team was going anyway. France's resolution required language so carefully calibrated that it communicated uncertainty while formally communicating participation. Spain's resolution arrived not through any action, but through a qualifying outcome. None of those are the same as the underlying concerns being addressed. What remains genuinely uncertain is what the 5 stories taken together mean for the future of this competition. The 2026 World Cup is underway. The football is being played. The moments will arrive that only this competition produces. But the conversations that 5 top nations had in the months before the opening whistle about whether to come at all, about what participation means in this particular context, about whether the institution running the sport is managing it in ways that reflect the values of the people who love it, those conversations will not be resolved by a goal or a result or a trophy. They will be there on the 19th of July. They will be there when the discussion about the next World Cup begins, and they will be there the next time a governing body makes a decision that places the world around the tournament in conflict with the tournament itself. What do you think? You've followed football through enough World Cups to have a view on where that line sits, the line between the game and the world around it. Did any of the 5 nations make the right call, or was there a moment in the past 6 months when you thought the calculation should have gone differently?
And when the next tournament arrives, wherever it is, whatever the circumstances, will the conversations that happened around 2026 make those decisions easier or harder for the federations who face them? If you found this worth your time, a like helps more than you'd think. Subscribe if you enjoy thoughtful football coverage, and let me know your view in the comments. I read every one. This story is still developing, and as always, football never stays quiet for long. See you in the next one.